Hey, bonjour, and then away maganitok, wabanakwit ndigo. Kwek kibinas keo zalbi tong minwa addition kas. Pajuga sha and dotem. Kakagi wat the so nigga mingin do unje. Apache jikandam pijaya no ma. Te garanto ishinakate mao tenang. Or as we say in English, hey, how's it going? I'm Kinew. I think today we find ourselves in a time where the Western liberal rights framework we have constructed is somewhat challenged. Snowden revelations ask us whether we have a right to privacy. Climate change asks us whether we have a right to clean water or a clean environment. I'm going to try and make the case that there's an alternative approach to thinking about things like rights. So in the Western liberal approach, you have rights focused on the individual, rights guaranteed to everyone, freedoms afforded to anyone. And I think it comes out of the Western liberal notion of sovereignty, that a state begins with a sovereign at the top of the society, and power flows down from there. And so we need an instrument like the Charter, or the American Constitution, or a UN Convention, to protect the individual from having their person infringed upon by that sovereign. But in the indigenous approach, it's not so much about sovereignty as it is about nationhood. It begins with the individual, who is completely and utterly free. And they invest their power in the clan, in the village, in the community, and then eventually up to the nation. And so growing up, I used to hear these pearls of wisdom from our indigenous oral tradition that I'll suggest to you are a sort of indigenous charter. Kego bapia ken abenonchi. Never laugh at a child. You don't know what the Creator has in store for that child. Who are you to judge? Kego chana mina ken, one of my favorites. Don't worry. Kego dajima ken kichi nishinabek. Don't gossip about your fellow people. Here we have imperatives directed towards the individual, but formulated with the group in mind. Don't laugh at a child so that all of our children may be free to reach their full potential. Don't worry so that our society can be free of negativity. Don't gossip so that our social interactions can be free. And so what you have are imperatives directed at the individual, but not in terms of rights, entitlements that they have individually, but rather as responsibilities that they hold towards the group. And I'd suggest to you that that approach, thinking about things in those terms, in what we owe rather than what we are entitled to, might help us to solve some of the quandaries we now face, including those faced by the descendants of that rich oral tradition that I just described. In Canada, last week, the RCMP confirmed 1,186 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. There is an empathy gap in this country when you can see 1,000, 1,200 mothers, sisters, daughters, and not act. Not only are we not acting, that wasn't even the top story on the day that that was announced. And do you know why? Because Rob Ford smokes crack. Guess what? We know Rob Ford smokes crack. What about Indigenous children in care? There are now more Indigenous kids in the child welfare system in Canada than were ever part of the residential school system. What about First Nations education? Hot topic. National Chief resigned. Government shelved the bill. Bill C-33 is designed to address a structural inequality levied against First Nations children in this country. Schools on reserve get $4,000 less, roughly, per student per year than do provincial schools. Regardless of what you think about the AFN or the federal proposal or the National Chief or where you affix blame in that equation, step back for a second and consider what it says about this country. That in 2014, First Nations people still have to negotiate for equality. We can do better. We ought to do better. And I would suggest that a place to start is by shifting the onus on what society owes us and start to think about what we owe our brothers and sisters around us. Yes, you do have a right. You are free to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But I would suggest that you also have a responsibility to those around you who are less fortunate. And with that, I'll say, miigwech kapizindawayek, or as we say in English, thank you.